Hi, everyone. My name is Sarita Scherpereel, and I am not your mother's realtor. And this is my podcast, Shit Just Got Real Estate. And I am joined by my best friend, client, and colleague, Megan Osberger.
Hello, everyone. This is a big one. This one's personal to you.
It's very personal. Today's episode is going to hit me in the gut.
Right in the feels.
In the feels.
We are talking about to be or not to be a landlord.
Yeah, so oftentimes I think I've bragged about myself enough on this show, but I do work with a lot of multi-unit investors, house hackers, first-time investors, clients that own now like 200 units. It is not for everyone. Becoming a landlord is not something that, although it sounds really great, and we'll talk about all the pros, it is something that you really have to take into consideration the full picture of what it means to be a landlord, to start your own business, to, go into investing. Oftentimes I think Instagram, and look, I'm guilty of this. I think our Instagram does a really wonderful job of highlighting all the benefits of being a landlord. And it can sound very glamorous, getting cash flow and passive income and eventually retiring on an island.
Tell me more.
I got drinking Mai Tais and it sounds sexy. It can trap you into a dream that I think sometimes for people, especially as you first get going, and you're coming from another career, there's just so much to consider. So as we dive into this a little bit, I keep thinking of this episode as kind of a come to Jesus moment, just because I guess I'm from the South and that's just one of the ways that we talk down there. Although we will not be talking about religion, but more it's just about having a mirror up to yourself and seeing okay, what is it I can offer at this time towards maybe pursuing this as a passion. So let's get started into first all those sexy things we were mentioning, Mai Tais on a beach, all the benefits of being a landlord, so that once we start debunking them, I feel okay, we highlighted the benefits.
Yeah, I mean, they're still true. It just means you might not pick them, right?
Right.
You might not decide it's worth it.
Yeah.
But the first one is that it's easy to finance.
Yeah, so you can buy an investment property to house hack. So that means if you're going to own or occupy an investment property with as little as 3.5% down, that's sometimes the easiest way to get into investing, because you can use that first property to leverage a second purchase or a third purchase and so forth, with a home equity line of credit, which if you attend any of our meetups, we're always talking about the HELOC, home equity line of credit, as one of those paths to invest and buy more.
Yeah. The second one would be making a profit.
Yeah, so making a profit eventually happens. It doesn't often happen on people's first property in terms of cash flow. However, when they go to sell, they might make a profit when they actually sell their property and after they've paid off their agents and all the transfer fees and taxes and things that they have to get out of it. It's always possible, even when you buy a condo in a single family home, you turn a profit for the property. But realistically, most landlords are looking for a long-term hold. They're not flippers who are looking to buy a property, house hack it, and then sell it in a year when they're done kind of living in it. For most people, it's just long-term investing. And the only real way you can create cash flow and substantial cash flow that will support your cost of living. So that typically comes from owning several properties, having a portfolio. It's not usually just, I'm going to buy this one building and this building is my nest egg and the golden goose.
Right. Although often you're getting help paying your mortgage, which is not what I have.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's definitely that.
Right. There's still advantages.
Yeah, there's definitely advantages of the first one. And for a lot of people, it still helps you to save for the second one. But I just really mean that in the sense of don't go into this thinking you're too flat is going to do all of these things for you.
Immediately turn a profit.
Yeah.
Okay, gaining equity.
So because you can buy a property, like Megan was saying, with, tenants helping you pay your mortgage, you're actually able to afford a lot more. And so the equity gain is higher in an investment property than it would be for a condo. So for instance, let's say you could qualify for a condo, I don't know, 500,000 based on like down payment income, but you may be qualified for almost double that when you take into consideration tenants paying your mortgage and then maybe using a low down payment program. All of those things are just really wonderful advantages that can help you get started if you decide to become a full-time landlord or a full-time investor.
Yeah. There's also tax benefits.
Yeah, and I think, in terms of like just overall, I think people love tax benefits. So even if you decide I have a lot of clients who are high net worth individuals, and they love the investment properties because they're able to either use the renovation or the depreciation of the property, vacancy, any of those things can help offset their higher taxes they might have. And that's also kind of tricky too, because oftentimes buyers will see properties as they're listed on the market. They're like, oh, the tenants are paying below market rate and they have a vacancy, and why don't they care about this property? And it's like, well, they got a lot going on. There's a lot more to their income and their net worth than this one property. So now, because we've outgrown this space, and let's see here, I don't know if you can hear that, but we're on Milwaukee and there's like sirens going by in the middle of our podcast. So I'm actually now looking for a mixed-use building so that we could have our business in one unit, and then maybe I live upstairs and then rent out maybe another unit to some librarians. That's what I want. I need librarians because
librarians can be crazy at night. Have you ever seen Parks and Rec?
I saw too your TikTok last night that was like your landlord didn't like a party and you guys are like quietly up there just like.
Yeah. She'll text us sometimes and say like, "Do you hear the bass?" And we'll just be like, "No." Like we actually don't have music on. She's always like, "Do you hear this? Do you hear this? Is it the neighbors? Is it you?" And we're like,
Yeah. Oh my God. When's your lease up? August.
Not very soon.
Sweet Kenny better get on his house hack. So maybe that'll also be a pro is no nosy landlord. On the other end,
you are the nosy landlord.
You are your own nosy landlord. And as Sarita, the landlord, I would like to also rent to tenants that I'll text. Do you hear the bass? But sorry. So going back to like the tax benefits of this, my personal favorite on like the tax benefits is if you have a multi-unit that has a mixed use, high net worth individual, and you're able to offset, the depreciation factors. And then, okay, I guess I want to talk about too the tax benefits of like your rehab. And look, I'm not an accountant, so I can only speak high level of what this is. It's going to depend on your own individual scenario. And also too, for me, because I do make a lot of money, but I spend a lot of money on my business, I need more tax deductions. And so a rehab is like something I'm really looking at as something I need for my own taxes. Because I'm going to pay a lot in taxes this year.
And you should talk to an accountant before you buy about this. I feel like we should just say that, right? Yeah. Don't buy it and then talk to the accountant.
Yeah, so you want to make sure that you're considering like not only what you can purchase and what you can afford, but like also your lifestyle. And I will tell you, there's so many times, especially like all my finance guys who have like Bitcoins or, or living in, oh man, I'm painting some really sexy stereotypes. You live in River West.
You live in River West?
I know. I'm trying to paint the picture of what I want to see.
Sarita's a finance pro, everyone.
You live in River West. You have 3 outdoor spaces and a parking garage that's heated. And you make 6 figures. And so you need some tax benefits. But yeah, definitely talk to your accountant before, because my lifestyle right now would be completely downgraded if I were to live in a 2-unit, maybe in the burbs. Because I think this is a lot sexier than the suburbs. I mean, I know that sounds, elitist.
It's okay.
Shitty agent
You're allowed
from
to
the
like
city here.
You're allowed to like the city.
I think
it
it's,
doesn't mean everyone has to want to live in the city.
Right. But I just think if I'm too far west, it's also hard for my job. It's hard to date. It's hard to like get to some of the bars and restaurants that I like.
Right.
So, in terms of like also talking to your accountant about like your lifestyle of like, okay, well, if you're in your 30s and you have to think about your lifestyle, of how hard you've worked to get where you're at, is it reasonable for me to say, hey, I'm going to live in a garden unit?
Right.
Like, not anymore. 10 years ago, oh my God, I was thrifty as fuck. And I would have lived in a garden unit all day long if I knew that I was creating the type of wealth that could be in front of me.
Right.
But now I'm at a different lifestyle, and I also have, mouths to feed here. So with you and
we're hungry.
And Kayla, like in our feed me all night long. I think it's just also those things that you have to like be honest with yourself about, and your accountant, and when you talk to your lender. I know like Landon and Mike Ficini at Fairway, they're two great guys to connect with on these things, because they'll talk to you about like lifestyle, like how realistic it is for you to live, maybe in Elgin,
right?
And which you can find some really great house hacks out in Elgin, but you have to live out in Elgin. And if you are living in, River
well, if you're
West,
living in
harder.
Elgin and you're having to commute into the city, like that's long.
Yeah.
Okay, another fun thing, or I guess or not, but I think a lot of people want to be their own boss.
Yeah, so I kind of call bullshit on this one, right? Because while you are your own boss, I am my own boss, but there are literally at any point in time many, many people that have needs that supersede mine. So if you need to see a property, if your tenant's having an issue, you need advice, any of those things, you come to me. So like being your own boss is not often at the hype that it's made out to be. You do have a lot of control in like what you say yes and no to. But in terms of being a landlord, one of the things that we'll talk about that you need to consider is the time of it. So while you are your own boss, there are still people that need you for support. So your tenants might need things, your contractors might need things, your accountant might need things. You're still having to steer your ship. And I think oftentimes, especially when I talk to like, anybody that's been really down the rabbit hole on Instagram, they might, forget that this is actually going to be a big part of the management of all of it.
Right.
So I say
and I mean, you can always do this and hire a property manager, but just a lot of people don't, because then that eats into their profit of what they're doing.
Especially as you first get going.
Right.
And house hackers, you don't want to have a property management company. One, you need to learn how to do this yourself. And two, it's going to eat up so much of your income that you could be saving for your next property.
Right.
It just, to me, it doesn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And I have a client right now who has over 100 units, and he's still self-managing, and I have another guy that's closer to 200 now, and he just hired someone as like a property manager, kind of part-time, that does like showings and all the tenant requests and stuff. And that's after he's been doing this for almost 10 years.
Yeah. And so it's really like you can control what you can control, but none of us can control when the heat turns off.
Yeah.
And you just have to get it fixed.
So, okay. Now, those were like all the pros on this. But one of the things that is going to make me kind of sound like a shitty used car salesman is I think that in order to talk about the things to consider, you have to see the properties. So we talked a little bit about that lifestyle, and I said some really elitist things about where I live right now. So I think, you want to consider all of these things, but you have to be in the inventory to know what I'm talking about when I say like, okay, well, yeah, Elgin might be really far away. If you have to commute to the city, that can be something to consider. Even living in like West, because Logan Square is huge, but living in West Logan can be very difficult for people who need to commute as well, because you might have to take a bus to a train.
Yeah.
So the only way you're really going to understand the property, the neighborhoods, just the location in general, is by like going to the properties, taking time to see some properties. Open houses are coming back. They're definitely happening, and I would encourage anybody, especially if you haven't started working with an agent yet, and are just like kind of considering this, even a couple years away from considering this, go see some properties, because then it's going to help you see all these considerations. But I tell you what, maybe before we do the considerations, we just take a quick break to reset here, and then we'll dive deep into what to think about on our episode, To Be or Not to Be a Landlord. All right, you guys, we are back, and we are talking about the things that you need to consider when you're thinking about becoming a landlord and a first-time investor. So the first thing, and I'm going to start out real hot here because I think it's going to tie in all of the pros and really give you the focal point of what the rest of the conversation is going to be about. But when you're purchasing your first investment property, a lot of times my first-time buyers won't understand how many hats they're going to have to wear when they start investing. And really, you have to imagine your investment property like you're taking on or starting a new business. So let's say you are looking to invest in a property. You need to be aware of maybe, the accounting, the bookkeeping, kind of be your own general contractor in some regards, making sure projects are managed, looking at the property with a set of eyes like an engineer would. Be familiar with marketing and sales and strategy. And what do I have on here? Also, as an accountant, a little bit of a lawyer, because you got to know about tenant laws. There's just so many things that you need to know. And oftentimes, if you have a full-time life and you have a full-time job and maybe children, or you're just a hussy dating out in Elgin, there's a lot to consider when it comes to basically starting your own business. So we want to make sure that you are aware of all the ways you have to kind of look at and envision the tasks of the property and managing the property, even if you decide to eventually become and go through a property management company.
Yeah, I think it's such a big job. Like, we had a meetup where a property manager came and talked, and I'm not a landlord. I did not think of a lot of the stuff. He's just like, oh, and every spring a roofer comes and inspects every single property, and it's like, oh,
yeah.
Like, whoa.
Yeah, Westward 360, which is one of my favorite property management companies in Chicago. They'll have all of their properties inspected by an inspector and a roofer. A roofer. Yeah. And then they'll just evaluate like where, certain roofs are at. If it's going to last 3 years, or there are areas maybe you could add some
budget
light fixing now, and then budget for the future. And I think that's really important.
Yeah, and it was just a lot of things that I had not thought about, even though this is what I work with you and I know what clients do. It was a lot of things that I had not really thought about. So it's a lot to take on, and if you're going to do that, especially while you have another job, you need to have your eyes wide open when you go into it.
Yeah. And our next reason or consideration that you need to have is the time. So oftentimes I work with a lot of really intelligent guys that have, C-level jobs and maybe a lot saved, but they just don't have the time to allocate to the learning process, because all those things that I mentioned are just going to it just takes time to put together. Look, I mean, this stuff is not rocket science, but it is one of these things that you don't want to go into it with like this ignorance is bliss mentality, because then you could be hit with building code violations, or, tenants are maybe running wild. So you want to make sure you have an understanding of, how you can account for the property and what you can be doing to care for really your investment. And oftentimes, like I've worked with a couple of accountants, and they'll tell me like, okay, I've basically got until like January 1 to buy something, because once the new year starts, I work 90 hours a week and I just will not have time to look for properties. Projects need to be done after that time period. So you have to analyze your life, right? So like when things are usually busy for you or busy for your other job, you kind of have to know what that is going to look like with how you put together your search, and then also what kind of property that you can actually purchase.
And how you'll manage it. If you are going to be working 90 hours a week for 3 months of the year.
Is it realistic?
Yeah.
Can you take on a gut rehab, right?
Right.
So let's say you are going to work 90 hours a week for the foreseeable future, and you really want to buy an investment property because it's smart. Maybe you go with something that's a little bit more turnkey. So there's solutions out there to these things, but you have to identify what your kind of like sore spots are. Work with your realtor to identify the opportunities to work through them, and then make sure you have the budget to support that.
Right.
And the other thing too in all of this is that there is just a lot of risk to consider. Whether you're working with an investor-friendly agent or not, you want to be able to talk about the property structure, projects that are needed, and really go through the financing of projects that are needed so that you're not hit with any like capital expenditures or big CapEx expenses. Are going to be like your big projects, like your roof, your tuck pointing, things like that are usually a lot more expensive than painting shitty walls.
Right. Like when you're thinking about it, it's not, is someone's air conditioner going to go out? It's like someone's air conditioner is going to go out or whatever.
How do you budget for it?
Yeah. How are you ready for the risk? Because it's an investment like any other investment. There is a risk involved. What are you going to do when you have a month or two of vacancy? Like, think through it and be ready for it.
And to talk about vacancy a little bit, and I would love, oh my gosh, we should have Westward 360 come on here because I really want to argue with Nathan about vacancy, because they have really high vacancy rate when they analyze all their properties, and then my vacancy rate's really low, especially if you're within like a 5 to 10 minute walk of a train. Like to me, it's a different strategy, but one of the arguments I would make with him is also like, if you're self-managing your property and you're doing your own rentals, if you're not a salesperson and you're not good around people showing your property to possible tenants that are going to be living with you. So like Kayla's situation with her landlord that, right away, you knew right away when you met with the landlord that like this was going to be probably intense. I know we had talked about it offline too. But let's say she had like a realtor meet you at the property and they're walking you and Kenny through all the like great things you can do with it, and not mention the fact that you can't make a noise while you're in it. That might have been a little bit, deterrent to other people. But if you know that that's who you are as a landlord, I mean, my recommendation is you get a rental agent or someone to just do the rental, or rely on like if you have a girlfriend, wife, or boyfriend, significant other, whatever, that is a little bit more salesy. Work with your strengths and then work with the people that you have to help showcase the place in the best possible route. And then you won't have the vacancies. And you also won't have vacancies if you also have a good strategy for tenants. So making sure your tenants are happy, things are not needed. So like my place right now that I just moved into actually needs some things repaired. And I'm not going to tell my landlord about it because we have this podcast. I work from home. The day we had the contractors come in and fix 3 of the things that needed was like hell.
It was a big day.
It was a big day. It was a lot to manage in between things too. So making sure like the tenants are happy is going to help you avoid that turnover. And then also if your tenants like you, they're going to be a little bit more honest on like, hey, we're probably going to move out in the spring.
Oh, yeah.
And then you can kind of know, you can market the property early, especially if they'll allow you to do showings before they actually move out. Like there's a lot of really easy ways to work with this if you have people skills. But not everybody does.
Right.
So if you don't, find Megan.
I am really good with people.
You are. You are really good with people. And so let's say I wasn't, I would have like asked you for help in some, regard, because I think you could have easily shown a property, my property, to a possible tenant.
Right.
Now, if you're not licensed, obviously you can only do certain things on like PadMapper, Zillow, apartments.com, Domu. You cannot post a property without having a licensed realtor on the MLS. So that's also one thing to consider too. So if you're having a risk of vacancy and you are in this mode where you need some help, like just get a realtor, because they're going to be really able to get you more for the property than maybe what you had even anticipated. And this all sounds very stressful, which
Number 4, everyone.
is number 4. There's a lot to consider. Even just right now, talking about vacancies, we haven't even said the E word, which is evictions.
Yeah.
We haven't even talked about like the real risks of, tenants doing all kinds of crazy things. I've had clients had tenants who've had fires in the building and also didn't tell them that there was a fire. That was great. This is like a shit story. I did a final walkthrough once, and we're walking through one of the units, and the kitchen had caught fire maybe earlier that week. And the tenants were just like, this happened like a couple of days ago. And then the landlord was like mortified, because sometimes on the bigger buildings, the landlord or the owner will have to come with you because they have like 50 keys. And then sometimes too, tenants may not speak English, and so they're talking in whatever language. And so it's just easier. So it'll be like both agents, landlord, seller, and the buyer, and then the tenants. And so there was a lot of us in this unit, and it had caught fire. So that was a big deal. But yeah, so, you want to make sure that you are thinking about the stress and putting that into your time commitment. So if you know that like you intend on living in the property, you're probably going to be on call 24/7.
Yeah.
That's how it's going to be.
And I mean, hopefully you find tenants who are still respectful. Most people don't have any problems with their tenants. Like, that's the majority of tenants. They won't have an issue, or something breaks, someone gets a text. It's not that big of a deal usually, and they figure it out. But it's the 1% of the time it's not like that it can become
and it becomes very stressful.
Deal.
Yeah. Especially if you have another life outside of being a landlord.
Right. Or if they're near your neighbor too. That can be stressful.
And
if
you
you're
have to
frustrated with someone, and then you still need to say hi in the hallway. That can be hard. But I think that kind of brings us into the 5th one.
Oh, wait, one thing I wanted to say about the time commitment and stress, and this is actually the same thing for realtors out there. The second you go on vacation is the second something will happen. So have contingency plans, have people in place that can help, and then also just what is it? Give it to God. Let go, let God.
But
something like that.
Yeah. The contingency people first.
Absolutely. Have your contingencies, and then at some point you just kind of have to walk away from it because everybody needs a break. But, look, if you get your good crews, you have, good relationships with people in the building, then these are things that are easier to manage. So I just wanted to tie that in. Yeah. So the last one is really hard to kind of talk about because I'm a realtor. I need to stick to my lane of expertise on this, and I'm not an attorney,
right.
And I don't expect you to be one either. But you kind of have to know the law. So tenants have a lot of rights here in Chicago, for better or for worse. It's why a lot of investors either flock to or flock away from, certain parts of the city, and suburbs in Elgin look real good because
they're a different county, right? Too, so they don't have our county regulations. Yeah, so this is really important. Depending on where you live, you're going to have a completely different rule than maybe even the county next door or the city next door. You need to know the rules, and it's not like a one-time thing. They're changing, you need to keep up with it, and you need to be careful because depending on where you live, you could end up in a lawsuit that could cost you a lot of money.
And it's sometimes too, it's not about for me, the risk is, lawsuits are obviously very difficult, but I think for me the hardest thing on here about being a landlord is having access to the changes that that are made. For instance, like I have a client who was cited on his building because he didn't have his like property manager, and basically it's him, but he didn't have his name up there listed on the property because technically he's living in the property. Now, like in theory, he's on site and available, but the city sent him a letter basically just saying that he needed that with like a phone number, which is not a big deal. It's easy to do. It was a quick fix, but it's one of those things like it's like getting a parking ticket. When you see it in the mail, you're just like, oh fuck, like what now?
Right.
So it just, again, adds to the stress, adds to the accountability and the management part of this. But the big thing is like, now he's not in the building. So like he of course needs a sign, but even though you're not a lawyer, you need to know what the rights are and the laws are and the regulations for not only your tenants, the buildings, the building code violations, and also your neighbors too, and making sure that they don't have or doing things that could infringe on your property. And the Chicago Residential Landlord Tenant Ordinance, or the RLTO, is kind of the Bible. Wow, I'm talking about religion a lot. And I'm not very religious, but I'm sort of like, I get a little twangy. I get a little Texan, and I get a little like twangy. It does. Yeah. I'm going to start talking about a horse I don't have here in a minute. And here in a minute. Did you hear that? There was a little twang in that. All of a sudden, I'm super like, I think this is what happens when I start to preach. So it does. It just kind of comes out. But knowing the Chicago Residential Landlord Tenant Ordinance, the RLTO, I don't know why that's a very hard acronym for me to say. RLTO.
RL is not easy to say together, I don't think.
Yeah, with more letters followed. Yeah. But this is, the resource for all of the rights and regulations. It's a really big document, but look, this is also why you work with an investor-friendly agent, because like when there are changes, we posted on our Instagram. I know a couple of times I've been like, Kale, can you make this post really quick? This is really important information. We also do meetups because that will, help you bring information to you. So like Westward 360 came, they did our meetup and they were really wonderful talking about updates on laws. With COVID, the evictions happened.
Well, and also you may be trying to follow all the rules and just not realize, and it won't.
Yeah, it's the ignorance. It's just the ignorance.
But
that's
what's
hard.
Doesn't mean that it couldn't hurt you later.
Right.
So
well, it's just like when you're driving in your car. I'm like, the car analogy makes a lot of sense because like you could be speeding, you don't know it, and then it's like, oh yeah, there was a camera, or you're pulled over by a policeman.
Yeah.
So and you can't always be like, oh, I didn't know, I was really busy. Like, yeah, you might be able to get or distracted when you're driving. You might be able to get away with some of this, but again, like, you want to be coming into these things with eyes wide open so that you know how to manage them. And it's realistic management instead of management by crisis, because that's what happens when people become, I guess, eventually not as successful as they could be at this, because they aren't following a path that is, easier
or proactive.
Yeah. And they're going through these things in a smoother way. So these are just kind of things to think about and consider as you're putting together all your goals for properties. And we'll probably do more episodes talking about being a landlord, and we had Josh and Jess talk about their experience, and we've got a couple of other guests that are going to be, talking about from their point of view things that you should know. But it's not to deter you from fulfilling your dream, but it's more than anything just having some things to consider as you're starting to piece this together.
And so that you don't buy maybe a 10-unit building first. Maybe you say, I'll start with 4 because then I can learn how to manage this better. Yeah.
And even my landlords that may be able to buy a 10-unit building with 25% down, they say, hey, the residential is easier. It's, 2 to 4 units, it's smaller. It's easier to self-manage, especially if I get something by my office and like, our Albany Park, it's not too far away from my office and it's easier to manage. I think that there's definitely a lot of paths out there. And if you know yourself and can be true and realistic with yourself on what it is you can do and can't do, that's really half of it. Mm-hmm. That come to Jesus moment with yourself. Yeah. Sorry, throwing religion back out there again. But yeah, so I think that's kind of it in a nutshell, at least for today. Class is over.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks for
everyone.
listening, you guys. Have a great week.